Well, good morning. I'm Mark Prisk, and I'm going to be hosting this particular session on the future of planning. I'm delighted to say we have three distinctive speakers who I'll introduce in a moment, but let me just briefly introduce myself and the subject we're going to look at today. For my background is I've been in the property industry for 15 or 20 years, then went into Parliament. I'm a former housing minister, though as I think many of us will realise that's not an exclusive club these days. And I'm now a non-exec director. I work again in the property field, but I'm also a professional coach and mentor. My work experience in the planning system has taught me that it's actually not one single entity. It is both a complex legal and technical system, but it's also something that generates an immense amount of heat and passion and political debate. And that tension is very often what lies at the heart of some of the problems in how planning actually works. Now, earlier this year, the government established a white paper. And indeed, one of our speakers was on the expert task force that helped form that white paper. And it offers a radical change of direction. Simpler, faster, the ambition for it to be digital rather than analog, and also a switch in terms of its focus away from all the energy being pushed into individual planning applications and back to perhaps what might have been the original view of town and country planning in the 1940s, which is that it's making that matters rather than necessarily all the energy and attention focused on individual applications. There's also, very importantly, at the heart of the white paper, a radical change in its attitude towards design. And that is a very significant shift in the way in which the planning system could operate for the future. So there's a lot to discuss around the nature and the future of planning, and I hope that all of you who are watching this will feel able to participate. Before I introduce the three speakers, the game plan is 5 minutes for each speaker, and then it will be, roughly speaking, about 10 minutes for questions. So do start feeling that you can put your questions up on the system, and God and the technology willing, I will be able to field your questions as we go. So, and if it's particularly a question to an individual speaker, then do make sure that you make that clear, and I'll do my best to field it. So today we have three speakers on the panel. Mary Parsons is the chair of the Town and Country Planning Association and also director of Places for People. Bridget Rosewell is a respected economist and has tremendous experience, particularly in the fields of infrastructure and real estate, and perhaps most relevantly to this was on the task force that advised on the planning white paper. And last but by no means least, Nick Boyce-Smith, of course, the founding director of Create Streets and also a co-chair of, and I always have to pause at this moment, deep breath, the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission. But is now also, as I think of Monday, Nick, now going to be leading a new expert body to keep ministers on the straight and narrow for design. So he's got his hands full there. Let us kick off, if we can, with Mary Parsons, who's going to talk to us on her views on the future of the white paper, but on planning as a whole. Mary, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. Normally, I introduce myself and say I'm going to wear a number of different hats, a TCPA, a Building Better, Building Beautiful Commissioner, and as a developer. But I decided today I'm just going to talk as me because I've been flipping hats for the last few weeks on the planning white paper. So sort of standing back, no one I've spoken to has said that the planning system in this country doesn't need major reform. Whatever the sector, they all agree on that. So the debate is about the how and the why. And the current system, I think, doesn't work for anyone participating in it. We know it's tortuously long, it's complex, it's expensive, it's a barrier for new entrants entering the market. But it has at its heart a really noble purpose. But as legislation and politics and so on have layered on, I think it's become a bit of a defensive Mr. Potato Head. It's had all of these things grafted on and it's lost the sense of what it actually is. And it's trying to act as what, Nicholas, we said quite eloquently in the Commission report, a shield against the worst. It's not functioning as a champion for the best at present, and I'll come back on that. So I know a lot of planners in the public sector welcome the government's acknowledgement of the importance of planning. They do have some concerns, but they do feel that many of the changes can help them actually go back to do the job they joined the profession to do, which was to plan places and not just work in development control. They acknowledge they do need resources, training and development to do it, but I think actually both communities and developers are going to have that to really understand and work within the new system. I think it's great it isn't just a stick in plaster solution, it is a new system. So I'm not going to start with whether it's the right or the wrong system, but what the government has proposed. And it's a plan-led, but not a plan-dictated system. But with a system redesign, you have to really be clear about what the problem you're trying to solve and the outcomes you want to achieve. And I think that's where the white paper, from a personal point of view, needs to go further, because it starts on the primary assumption that planning is the major barrier to delivering more homes. But I think if Yolanda Barnes was on the panel, she'd be saying actually that land and money have as much impact as well. And it's not just the system, it's the outcomes. And the outcome needs to be about ensuring good growth, about better outcomes for people, about levelling up areas that have been left behind. And centrally determined housing numbers, which seems to be the heart of the debate, isn't sort of that strategic planning. But it's about the economic growth, energy, transport, health, well-being, planning for good growth, of which housing is obviously a huge part, but not the only part. And I think there's been a lot about the question as to whether it's democratic. I think pushing democracy upstage to the plan making stage is absolutely essential. Nicholas will testify. I often made the point that I think the current local plan process contributes massively to the adversarial and litigious nature of what follows on in planning. But that shouldn't be at the expense of democracy further downstream. But then I'd also say a lot of local planning committees I've seen, are they truly democratic? It doesn't necessarily work. And I think there's a big difference between democracy in planning and participation in planning. And the latter to me is essential. And Mark and I both know a community or communities that fought against large scale development in their area for decades. But actually, when it went through the plan process and when the plan was adopted, and they had their say at the examination in public, they took an incredibly difficult decision to work with us as developer. They still don't want development to happen, but if it's going to happen, they want to make sure they have the chance to push us and test us and get the best outcomes for their community. And I have a massive respect for them. And their inputs are undoubtedly, at the stage we're at now, making it a better place, because they have an insight and a love of where they live that we could never have. And I think at the heart of what the planning white paper needs to do, it does need to rebuild that trust between communities, the public and private sector, because actually no one trusts anyone currently. You've got to have faith in the planning system to make the right decisions, even if some of them are not the decisions you want. And I think we do need to have a think through about how the zoning, the code and permission in principle will actually enable genuine co-creation to happen. Because I think the public sector doesn't have to lead on everything. I think landowners, there needs to be a new compact as to how the sectors work together. And I also think local people need to be able to bring that richness and understanding of a place that perhaps even the best pattern book alone wouldn't be the measure for. So applying the two commissions test, will the new system be a shield against the worst? Yeah, I think it will. I think it will lift the bar. It has got genuine push on quality and standards, and it should prevent the worst developments happening. Brackets, if the government does something more about permitted development rights. Is it a champion of the best? I think that's the real test, whether it can really create places that deliver the net gain and not just no net harm, and that are truly beautiful at all of the three scales we said within the Commission's report. And I think I probably need to see the next level of detail to fully make my mind up on that. So on that point, Mark, I'll pass back to you.
Well, thank you very much for that, Mary, and I think that's been very helpful. I think Mr. Potato Head probably will certainly be an image most of us will keep in our minds, and that notion of democracy versus participation, I think, is a really good theme. Let me come now to Bridget. Bridget, would you like to set out your initial views on where you think the future of planning lies?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mark, and it's great to be here. I really enjoyed my participation in the task force, even though we were entirely virtual. Which is not something I always enjoy, but I thought we really got to the heart of some of the issues. And I'm really encouraged by Mary's take on what we've been trying to do. The proof of the pudding will, of course, be in the eating, and we won't know about that for some considerable time. But the more positive everybody can be that something does need to be fixed, that we need to get on it, and that we need to help the government to craft the right system, the more that we're all positive about that rather than just pushing back, I think that's very, very important, because it comes back to that engagement and participation point, which I agree is incredibly important. I'm a commissioner with the National Infrastructure Commission. We also there push devolution, push the need to get down to the local grassroots. And one of the key recommendations, in my view, from the task force and in the white paper, is that you can't put forward a local plan if you haven't done prior engagement with your communities. You have to have discussed it up front, and you have to have asked for ideas from your local community. Some people came back and said, oh, that'll just be developers. But I don't see why that need to be the case. I think that's just a counsel of despair. You can go out to your local communities, get them to come in, tell you what they like, tell them what you don't like, and have that debate before you get to an examination in public where everything becomes so much more adversarial. It's absolutely right, as Mary said, that we need to get away from that. I love the Mr. Potato Head analogy. For me, it's been the Slough of Despond engaging in local planning processes. So that was mine, but maybe Mr. Potato Head has got more visual kick than the Slough of Despond. So if we move on from that, so one of the key things is to get a simpler process for producing a local plan, a process which is more engaging up front, and a process which is quicker and less resource intensive for planners and people alike, which therefore allows space. And this for me is also one of the key things that we have to work out how to do, and that I hope the white paper moves this in the direction of. We have to work out how to give, if you like, the space, not the physical space, but the think space to do the design work. Because that is one of the ways where you can get new development, which actually is the kind of thing that people want, because it allows their children and their grandchildren to have somewhere to live that they can afford, rather than seeming to be, an estate which looks horrible and is plonked on the edge of their community with no connectivity. We've got this is the thing I think that could be the big win, and that we have to work together to achieve, rather than becoming adversarial about it. So can we do that? Can we produce that local plan which does that? So that's sort of the two key points: engagement, democracy, building trust, the simplicity. I won't talk too much about design. It's not my main field, and I'm sure Nick will talk about that anyway, but I do think that it is fabulously important, and something we worked on when I was doing work for the ARC, Oxford and Cambridge ARC, with the National Infrastructure Commission. But I just want to finish by talking a little bit about algorithms. Algorithms have had a bad press recently, not very surprisingly, but please don't forget that we've already got loads of algorithms in the planning process, and none of them work very effectively. We've got algorithms around all the tick box things that are out there, in environmental assessments, in schmars and schlars and everything else. They're all algorithms, right? They're all based on a set of data and some rules associated with those data. So don't diss the algorithm as such. Well, actually get rid of all of those anyway. So that was one of the other things I think is really important. We have to get rid of all this dross that we've added, all of those little potato head people, and go back to something which we can all understand. And that's the problem with the algorithm, is when you don't understand it, or when you write it and you don't really understand what it's going to do. People do like them because it actually avoids them having to make a decision or make a judgment. So we've got to get judgment back into this and inform it with real data. That means getting away from forecasts and projections which change as data changes, and something which is better based on judgment about where people actually want to live, and a discussion about where people actually want to live, and a judgment about that which is informed by data, but also by discussion. Thank you.
Well, Bridget, thank you very much for that. I think that's been a real tour de force in giving us a sense of some of the underlying issues, which I can already see are coming up in some of the questions. So thank you for that. We now come to Nick. Nick, do you want to give us your view? We're all anticipating design, but don't feel that you have to solely talk about that.
No, I shall. Thank you. Gosh, two hard acts to follow. I thought, if Mary will forgive me, I thought Mary was going to be more critical of the white paper. So I was assuming I was going to be defending it a bit more. I hope I can say this. When Mary and I started working together over a year ago, I think we thought we disagreed about almost everything. And during the course of the process of a year, I think we ended up agreeing on nearly everything. And it was an incredibly enjoyable process, and it's sort of what a commission should be, actually, finding the areas of overlap and changing your views a little bit in response to the other person. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about process and then a little bit about quality. Design, if you prefer. Some of this, I think, certainly Mary and Bridget and you, Mark, know very well, but perhaps, lots of people watching, just perhaps worth restating just a couple of important basic points that I think do nevertheless need repeating. One is that, all of us have a tendency to, fit a problem to our pre-existing views. And if you look at a lot of the discussion about, planning and about the housing crisis, it's a lot of people justifying what they sort of thought anyway. And I think it's just worth stating, all complex problems have complex causes, not simple causes. So, those who say it's just interest rates are wrong, because interest rates in the UK are not magically lower than elsewhere. In fact, they're higher. Those who say, it's just the lack of social housing are wrong, because we actually have the highest quantum of social housing in Europe and a higher proportion than most countries. That's not to say we don't need more social housing as part of what we need to build. We do, but it's not the causative problem. Those who say it's just planning in a simplistic way are also wrong, as everyone will, I hope, know. We're actually producing more planning permissions, than the rail housing target. So it's not simplistically that we're just not producing enough housing permissions and are rationing them. That there is an important point about who gets those permissions and who gets to apply for them and where they are. So we need sort of to delve down into the nature of the system to understand what's going wrong. And I won't, because we clearly don't have enough houses in the right places. If you look at the ratio of homes to households, actually across the country, but particularly in the high demand areas, the southeast, come back to that, it is one of the tightest ratios in Europe. So I think there's no way round, we don't have enough homes in the right places, and we have far fewer empty homes. So just to sort of, there are no simple answers to this. We need to delve into how the planning and housing and land markets work. And I agree that, it's not just planning, but you need to sort of work out how the three interrelate. And then I think the second point I'd make is that British planning is very strange in international terms. And I think it's just important that everyone understands that. There are some advantages to our strangeness. The fact that we put far more focus on development control and far less on strategic planning does mean that when you get weird and complex and unexpected cases, actually, I think you could make a good case. And I think the RTPI would make this case, and I think some of Mary's colleagues at the TCPA, that, we're better at dealing with idiosyncratic situations. I think that's probably fair. However, I would argue we're much less good, if you like, at coping with the sort of the good ordinary, or indeed in defining what the good ordinary is. If you look at the name and the legal nature of the primary permission you need to build in pretty much every other country, it is a building permit. And yeah, it's tick box, and there's nothing wrong with that. Regulation should be tick box in the sense that if it's not tick box, then who becomes incredibly important. And a quote that, again, I think both Barry and Bridget have heard me say before, but which is very shocking, is a developer who said to me a while ago, the worst thing that can happen to me during a planning application is that the development control officer changes. And actually, there's very little corruption in British planning. I think it's an enormous testament to the ethics of British planners and developers that there is remarkably little. But that isn't right, that you're judging the person rather than judging what is and what isn't permissible. So in that context, then I think we do need to start saying, how can we create a planning system where, yes, we are clear about what is and isn't acceptable, so that a wider number of people can produce homes, whether that's self-build, SME, custom build, market entrance, and the nature of the very concentrated UK housing market with a very high proportion literally delivered by the four biggest firms. And each time we go through a recession, SMEs get knocked out and then don't come back into the market because land costs and planning risk are very high. And lots of people say, oh, it's about lack of finance. It's not about lack of finance. There's loads of finance that wants to invest in British land, particularly in some parts of the country. But there is not loads of finance that wants to invest in planning risk, particularly planning risk for new market entrants who may not know what they're doing. And in fact, it's quite hard. It's quite easy not to know what you're doing in this system. So I think the white paper is my first point, and I'll then make one more point. I think the white paper is fundamentally right to be trying to address the nature of planning risk. However, given the very low levels of trust, and I'm coming to my second point now, in and with apologies to Mary, who I guess is a developer of a sort, with very low levels of trust in developers. I think it's 2% from memory, and in the planning system, I think it's 7% from memory. Those numbers may not be quite right. Clearly, trust us. We're just going to do the local plan for you. Trust us. We're professionals. It ain't going to cut it. And it's there is no longer confidence that to use the 1940s phrase, the man in Whitehall or Town Hall knows best. It would obviously be more than the man now, just to be clear. But that confidence is not there, and therefore we do need to find a way. And I think this is easier said than done. Of bringing, to use the phrase Mary used, of bringing the democracy forwards into the plan making process. And it isn't just about, I was going to say it's not just about quality, it is about quality, but it's quality broadly defined. And we defined in the commission last year, the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission, beauty at 3 levels: the beauty of the building, the beauty of the place, and the beauty of the placing of the place, how you get there, the impact you might have on the planet. A democratic process that is not just people on a wet Tuesday evening to decide those things at the local plan, or I think at the neighbourhood plan level, so that a range of developers, small and big, I think with the emphasis on small, know what's needed around here and can decide whether they want to do it, is what we need to do. And I think there's a tension in that. And I guess part of the role that I've just accepted is going to be to start thinking about that tension, because clearly you can't have a system where, and I'm being silly here, but to make the point, where a nice bit of Buckinghamshire is demanding, I'm picking on Buckinghamshire completely at random, platinum taps on everything and gold plating on your houses to make things just ridiculously inappropriate. So there has to be some level of top-down constraint on what quality can mean. But we then do have to go through a process, to use a common law term, where local communities working with a local council can discover what good means around here. It isn't for me or any of us on this call to define that. So I think that's the flip side of bringing of being more plan led, is bringing the democracy forward. And I think the exciting thing, and actually Mary referenced the Homes England conference. I was also speaking at that yesterday. I don't get to chair a session; I just get to speak at it. But and the point I made there is actually we're at an incredibly exciting time. I think the explosion of digital online techniques does bring challenges to us as a society, but it does allow us also to reach out to a far wider demographic. There are now a range of platforms. Create Streets has got one, but there are others which are starting to use online tools. We were running an online co-design session as part of this conference over the last couple of days. If you haven't watched it, I recommend everyone watching to watch it. It's actually quite inspiring in places. And this is getting easier and cheaper to do. We did something on Leeds and got over 1,000 responses in 4 days on an almost zero budget. So I think the opportunity is there to bring quality forward. I can see my chairman nodding, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yes, I haven't got a long hook that I can reach out electronically to.
Your nods were enough, Mr.
That's fine. Well, that's great. The passion and enthusiasm is good. And it's been very interesting seeing the questions scrolling up, and indeed some of the commentary that's been going on whilst each of you have been speaking. So thank you all three for that. Can I just perhaps come back with one question myself, very cheekily as chairman, and I can ask you all to be reasonably prompt in just a quick answer. Do you think there is an inherent tension between the notion of simplification and putting design, something that's naturally subjective, back into the heart of planning? Is there a tension there? Bridget, what's your thoughts?
No, I think that there's tensions across the whole piece. But actually putting design in fact, is a way of getting something that people can understand. And that's why simplifying zones, there's been some challenge that in the chat that 3 zones is about reflecting developers. Absolutely, it was not in the discussions that we were having. It was about creating something that people could understand and that they could have an input into. And when you get into that design thing, that's absolutely where they would have an input. So I don't see a tension there at all.
Good. Mary, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I'd agree. It sort of sets the rules before you then start to engage with the actual sites and opportunity. And I think just picking up a point, Bridget, you made about combining data and discussion, I think that's the heart of it. We have to have an evidence-based system, but actually that can't be the total of it. From the TCPA point of view, we talk about the art and science of town and country planning. And I think you do need to bring both together.
So what I think some of the participants have been raising is this issue about how do you enable people to participate. There's several questions, but if I can pick out perhaps Susie Dye from Trust for London, she said, I'm interested in the idea of moving away from adversarial systems. At the moment, time-poor community volunteers are ranged against well-paid consultants and sometimes part of the local council, which have their own targets to hit. How do we resource consensus building? Now, that's not just about money and people. It's also perhaps about systems and technology. Nick, do you want to kick us off on that one?
I think there is. I mean, we recognise this in the Building Better Commission, and I think the white paper recognises it, and certainly the Secretary of State recognised it talking yesterday. I think there's a tension here. We're talking about changing what people do. We're talking about changing when they do it in the process, and organisational change is hard, and culture change is very hard. So. My personal view is that there will need to be, an uplift of resources for local planning. I think a system which is more strategic and less tactical should be more efficient, but certainly to get there, I think resources will need to go up. And the nature of things is quite hard to bring resources down again. So I think that is required, yes.
Yeah. Bridget, what's your thought on
that? What's really important is that until you require a change in culture and you offer the opportunity for people to do things differently, they won't. And I hear this all the time, we can't have devolution because there isn't the capacity. If you don't have devolution, there won't be the capacity. If we don't make these changes, people won't come forward to fill the roles. So I think, there's a feedback loop here. Don't be too negative about this.
Mm-hmm. And Mary, as you alluded to in your remarks, we've corresponded or we've engaged when I was a constituency member on trying to help local people have their say in an equal form. What's your take on how do we help those community groups?
I mean, I think we're having this discussion now with them because I think we need to shift the process, as has been said, because of the lack of trust and the barriers that are put up. At present, it's very much, developer produces something, local authorities involved, it passes to the community for comment. And we are, community representatives going through, 600-page planning documents. It's not what co-creation's about. Co-creation is sitting them at the table with them, actually planning it, actually working together, walking the site. We had more insights from actually spending an entire day walking around the site and pointing out hedgerows and features and things that matter to them than actually if we'd have given them even more resource to get a planning consultant to support them. So we will and have put those resources in because that's what they felt they needed to build that trust and confidence. But to enable communities to have a voice, it's a different way of genuinely working with them. And I don't think we've cracked that in a lot of cases at present.
Well, I'd certainly like us to have a little more time, but I've got the clock ticking over my head. So my apologies to some of the other people who put some very good questions up there. But perhaps I can, as chairman, just ask each of you about what you think success would look like in, let's say, 5 years if these proposals were implemented. 5 years on, what would that look like if it was successful? Just briefly, if I can ask you to wrap up in 30 seconds each. Nick,
did you want to go? Okay, yes, me. I think whether it's doable in 5 years, ? Far more people involved in the engagement on a local plan. I understand it's 1% at the moment. I'm not sure quite where success is, but it's many multiples of that. A higher proportion of homes being built through self-build, custom-build, SME. A richer complex of tenures. So it's not just sort of market versus affordable, but we're growing a huge range of responses to how people want to live. And though we haven't touched on it today, I think a growth in the stewardship market of people investing in places and land for the long term, as opposed to the volume house builder market, which is a rational response to the situation at the moment.
Very interesting. Good. Mary, what's your take? What will success look like if this is implemented 5 years on? We're looking at it. What would be successful in your view?
I suppose just sort of stepping back, thinking that for whatever reason that you're going to participate in the planning system, whether you are a developer, a landowner, whether you are a planner or whether you're someone in the community, that you actually have faith in the process that you're about to go through. And that actually, if you work through that process, it will get the outcomes that work for everyone, that we've got confidence and a belief in what planning can actually do for this country. And it hasn't been able to do that for quite a while now.
Well said.
Well, quite a big ask. And Bridget, finally, what are your thoughts on this? If I can ask you in 25 seconds or so.
My thought is I agree with those two. I would add that all of the areas without current local plans have local plans on the new style, and that they have shown the engagement that we all want. And that I'd say around, I don't know, half of local authorities have new style local plans.
Good. Well, look, I'm sorry that I haven't been able to include as many questions as we would like. We'll have to pitch for a little bit more time next time. Thank you to our three speakers. I think there's going to be a very exciting time for the future of planning, and I certainly look forward to being part of that debate as we go forward. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Shall you need to click the red door in the bottom left to exit? I know from painful experience. Bye-bye,
Okay.
everyone. Thank you, Mark.
Cheers, everyone. Bye.